be fair, with the weather today, I'd rather like one because it's cozy and warm and soft and stuff. Anyway, so hi there, everyone. Grüezi wohl. How's it going, Bern? Yes, the German guy speaks Swiss German. So I'm from Zurich, originally from Germany. Moved there 5 years ago. 6 years, 5 years ago. Definitely pay it a visit if you haven't been there. For all the Bern people, I know you don't like it, and that's fine. All the rivalry, just keep it down, tone it down, guys. Seriously. All right. So this is not my first time at Jazoon. However, it's the first time in this format of Jazoon. So this has been the Rookie Awards in 2012, where I have been speaking back then. That's me. And I wasn't fat back at the time. You can tell that I moved to Switzerland like the year before, and I ate all the cheese and all the Swiss chocolate. I highly recommend doing that if you're from abroad, but not in the extent I did, because then you turn like mushy and soft. I do stuff like this, which is not necessarily sort of related to web components, and we're not using web components in this part of our application, but still, I really love the web, and I love how versatile and diverse it is. If you can't read it, that's Safari, I'm not shitting you, 505, and Safari frickin' 4, all right? And it's like copyright until 2003 to 2011, and that was running last year in a hotel room that I was in, and I'm like, ooh, this is a very different version of the web. But you know what? If you do it right, stuff still works. So that's pretty cool, and I like it. And I really want to sort of evolve the web as we are evolving without breaking backwards compatibility. And one way of doing that is web components. And before we talk about web components, we should, for a moment, talk about HTML, because I kind of think it's being mistreated recently, where we go like, ooh, JavaScript, all things JavaScript. Ooh, look, I can build a thing, a drone with JavaScript that flies and then crashes because there's like a nan somewhere, not a number thing. That's cool, but I'd rather go for a more declarative approach to things that is resilient as well. So like, React goes, ooh, we're all declarative, whoop, whoop, JSX. And I'm like, whoop, whoop, no, because it's all in JavaScript, you dumb people that sort of think that you should discard that. React is, however, really cool because it can do something that web components, for instance, can't do, which is server-side rendering. And what does server-side rendering do? It renders HTML. Da-da. So that is pretty cool. It's very resilient. So if something in your HTML document isn't quite right, the browser tries to figure it out, okay? Even if you use front page on Windows 98, you probably get a sort of working web version. That is okay. If you export your stuff from Word into HTML, it kind of works in most cases, unless you do crazy things. If an image doesn't load, it looks crap, but it still works. And that is really, really cool. If you misplace a curly brace in JavaScript, it might actually just not do anything anymore. Yikes. So I really like that. And it's very semantic. So all these different sort of elements tell us exactly what the purpose of a thing is. An image is an image, and you're like, oh yeah, makes sense. An input is an input. Yeah, nice, makes sense, I guess. A video is, you guessed it, a video. And that's really nice because we can also basically consume that in semantic fashion, and we can enrich it with attributes that can then be read by crawlers and stuff, and it gives us helpers for people who might be visually impaired, for instance, so you have accessibility built in. It's really nice, and it's a technology for everyone. And I love that fact. You don't have to own the latest computer. You don't have to run a specific operating system. You don't have to have beefy hardware. It works 90% of the time. But it came from a different time, and this is perfectly fine and absolutely totally still works, and we have a form that allows me to input data, and it looks crap because it's a super old browser. It's a Netscape browser. But this stuff, the markup that powers this, will still work in my latest Chrome, my latest Safari, my latest Internet Explorer or Edge browser. And the problem with this is it's old and nice and fine, but it's geared towards documents. If you look at what elements we have in HTML, it's all geared toward documents. We have lists, we have headers, we have links, which is cool. We have images, we have videos, all that. but not really that much stuff for making interactive elements. We have buttons, we have inputs, we have sliders recently. We, on some browsers, have date inputs and stuff, but it's very, very limited. And we want to build stuff like this, or maybe not, but most of the time interfaces sort of take from a broader palette of user interface items, and we probably want to extend these with our own if we figure out that a certain pattern or a certain interaction doesn't exist, and we totally need it, and it totally made sense, and we totally user tested it, and we totally know that users like it, and we totally know that it's accessible. Just FYI, because not just go like, ooh, I have this crazy thingy here where you can basically do a handshake with your computer and it magically does stuff, and then everyone else goes, no, what is this? How do I do this? So how do we get from this to this? Well, semantic markup would be nice. So just imagine this, Google Mail, and you have a Google Mail app component that has a sidebar with some stuff in it that I left out. And then you have an email list with all my email threads, and then you have an email thread with a certain ID that is belonging to a certain conversation I have with someone. And then you have email content, and you can see who sent me an email, and the subject and the ridiculous text they write. And probably then you would see more of these. And that's easy and nice to read. So if I basically collapse this, I kind of know, okay, this article belongs in a email content element, so it's probably the content of an email. Nice, this makes sense to me. However, the reality is this. So we have a div in a div in a div in a div with some diffs, where there's a table with diffs. And the fun thing is, I couldn't just even fit the entire thing in here, because there's just this blank of doom, right? It's like, what is here? Don't go there, you will be eaten by a grue. So we kind of lost it. I mean, this is definitely a modern web application, and it has all the things that you should have, like it's a single-page application, and it does stuff, and you can link to certain parts of it, and woo, but it's a div soup, and that's not good, because we are losing a very important bit of functionality and richness. And I think this is because we are lacking building blocks for modern applications. And the reason that is because everything is to be standardized, and standardization takes some time to do it right, which is all right. So whenever we come up with a new great way of doing things, we have to basically hack it in as a series of dirty, dirty hacks, because the platform doesn't move it moves quickly, but not as quickly as we are moving. Some people even say it moves too fast. Some people even say, like, no new features for now, just, fix the stuff that we left behind half broken, which is a valid approach and a valid position. And I do agree. However, we should be able, we as developers, not they as the standards platform community, should be able to move things forward and try things out. And experimentation is an important part. And a lot of people have discussed this, and a lot of frameworks picked up the discussion and came up with the fact that we need components. So that we have components that are isolating functionality, and that we can reuse and share and extend these components. And I absolutely agree. But I'd like components to not be a kind of esoterical thing that sort of exists in only one part of the world, and then sort of like, or even worse, everyone doing their own version of it, and then they're absolutely inoperable. For instance, the fear could be, just imagine, we probably have more JavaScript frameworks than there's people in this room. Or let me rephrase that, more JavaScript framework being created since I started my talk as there's people in this room. Which is true, that's why you're laughing. And it's okay, that's not wrong. What's problematic is if each of these frameworks has an incompatible way of doing componentization. So I want my components to be, first of all, declarative, because it's kind of nice when they are. That's a sort of nice to have, to be honest, but they should be resilient, which means if there is some sort of syntax error, if I'm using it slightly wrong, it shouldn't completely render my application useless or blank, right? It should be interoperable, so it should be working with other people's components, and especially with other technologies' components, as in, I should be able to use your component from Angular 2 easily in my application without having to basically write an entire Angular 2 application. That'd be terrific, because you have done the hard parts and made this component, and it works and it does the trick that it should be doing. But I can't use it because I might be using Ember. And that would be said. Luckily, we're not in that place. I should also be able to literally just mix random components if they fit, if they do what I think they should be doing, and I should be able to extend them as well. They should also be as agnostic as possible, and they should give me ease of use. I should be familiar with the way certain components work. For instance, when you have an HTML element, I expect to be able to attach event listeners to it. And it should emit some sort of event. A click event, if I go on click as an attribute, that should work. If I click on the thing, it should run the function that I specified. It should work as a normal tag. I shouldn't be needed, or I shouldn't be required to learn a new domain-specific language to use your component. I should also not be needed to, I don't know, compile something into JSON that then sort of on runtime is parsed. And no, we have HTML4. It's a solved problem. Get over it. So that would be cool. And here's a sample on how we do things right now, mostly when you're not using a framework. So avoiding a framework in this position. And we want a list where things are like, you have a list of items and you have the possibility to type something into an input box and it filters the list. So we would possibly go, okay, I have a div that I mark up as a filter list using class, which is basically a hack because it should really be used for, you know, CSS. So this is more or less a style information on how this should be rendered, not really an information of, oh, this is, by the way, a filterable list. So it gets shady from the start. And then we have a label that says, like, search for something, and then we have the input, which uses an ID. So I can't have 2 or 3 of those in the same document because they would collide on IDs. Bugger. So this is going downhill really quickly. And speaking of downhill, not the nice way with the Bern. No. It's just more like tumble. And then we have the actual list. And then we have some items in here. I forgot to finish the joke. Chuck Norris is technically dead, but dead didn't have the sort of confidence to tell him. All right, so that was the Chuck Norris. No, I completed it now. It wouldn't have fit on the slide anyways. So the bigger problem I see when I see this is not just the fact that we are abusing ID here and we are abusing a class here. There's the other problem that this is more or less a bunch of elements. And I just, by the fact that they are written together, I can conclude that this input field here somehow relates to the list, but it doesn't really, I can't be sure until I try, right? And then we have the JavaScript to it, which is hilariously spaghetti. So we go, give me the filter term whenever there's a key up event or an input. I could have used an input event really on the filter term input. So if I type things in, then I had to shorten query selector all. Sorry, I have to query all the LIs that are in the filter list, and then I get all of them. And for each of them, I set them to I set their style to display none if they don't match the search input. So literally, we go through the entire. Whenever a key is pressed, we go through the entire list and check if they should be. We could optimize this, sure, but like, really? And we are using query search as query selector all, and we just rely on the fact that there's nothing else in the document that has the same class, and we're relying on the ID here, and it's not reusable, and it's spaghetti, and it's terrible. So what can we do about it? Well, the first thing is we kind of go, it works. That's not the best approach because we're probably going to have to maintain this thing. And I'm not sure about you, but I would not really like to have to maintain this thingy. We could make it a plugin because that worked really well for Java, Silverlight, and Flash. Or we standardize it. You know, you just join the W3C, which is free and easy to do. You just sign up there. And you attend the meetings, and then you fly around the world and talk to people, and they are all a bunch of really, really nice people, and they're super lovely and super supportive. No, they're really lovely and really, really supportive, but it's freaking hard to do standards work. I find it absolutely amazing how they all manage to not just kill each other the second they show up for the second meeting. Because it's super hard, like everyone has an opinion and everyone's opinion is kind of right, but wrong in other ways, and then you have to sort of figure out what works for everyone and what's the best for the web. And holy shit, I don't want to be the arbiter on what's best for the web because, oh my God, I'll die from responsibility. So it's really tricky, and we don't really have an option to sort of get out of that right now, unless we sort of focus on one framework and make it a plugin or a component within a certain framework. There's not much we can do about this, except for we could basically just build new HTML elements, I don't know, using HTML and JavaScript and CSS, and that would be totally cool, wouldn't it? And guess what? I thought first when I heard that, wow, this is crazy. This is nuts. And this is what they give you on SAS flights, by the way, and I found it super funny, but apparently you don't find it funny. It's fine. I'll cut this out. So you might think this is nuts, but just look at this. So we get a filter list that someone wrote from somewhere on the internet, and we check it and we read through the source code and we go, ooh, this is nice, this does what we want. And then we have our unordered list and say, this is a filter list. So this has high cohesion because this element is described declaratively as a certain type of subtype of list, which is a filterable list or a filter list. And then you have your items, and then you have internally the browser renders the list with a little search bar on top of it and maybe a search button or something. And you can type in, I don't know, Mars, and then it would only show the second Chuck Norris joke. Because you didn't laugh, I'm not going to read it out loud, but you know, whatever. It's fine. I'm not taking offense, you know. So voila, web components. I'm done. Thank you very much. Any further questions? No, just kidding. So web components, when we talk about web components, we want to make this happen. And we do it with these 4 standards or standard proposals. So web components really aren't one thing. They're a topic that sort of houses 4 different standards. The first one is the template element, which allows us to dynamically insert things into HTML in a nice declarative way, like you would probably use mustache or something for it, or handlebars, or gobbledygoo, whatever right now is hot and cool, whatevs, to sort of create these templates. Shadow DOM then allows us to isolate bits and pieces of the DOM to say, hey, no peeking, this is mine. And this is exactly what allows us to hide the implementation details. And custom elements then allow us to basically define our own tags or extensions of existing tags. So this is an extension of an existing tag. So we have the UL tag that exists for ages now, and we extend it by saying this is this extended version of it. Or just create your own tags. That's cool as well, you know. So that everyone can just basically write HTML, and then it magically loads your component and does the right thing. Speaking of loading your component, you somehow want to get these other components in. And yes, we could totally use ES6 modules and JavaScript and rely on them to sort of do the magic for us, but we could also just use HTML. So they figured out, hey, how about this? We just, you know, create a new HTML thing that allows you to pull in components from third parties into your application. Situation is, template element is actually a recommendation. So that's done and dusted. Shadow DOM is a working draft, as is custom or as are custom elements and HTML imports. So they are being discussed, but they're implemented in Chrome, for instance, already in the first version. Firefox hides their Shadow DOM and HTML imports behind the flag. More on that later, but they are coming. It's a thing that's happening, and all the vendors are in there. Apple considers it. Microsoft is working on it. Firefox or Mozilla is working on it. Chrome is working on them. So it's not a sort of like far out in the future thing. It's happening right now. The template element is the simplest and nicest and the most stable right now to begin with. So first of all, we solve problems like this. I'm not going to tell which bank did that. This is an e-finance thing from a bank in Switzerland. Cool story, bro. We don't want that. We want to sort of like have a safeguarded way to insert things into our documents like this. This is a document. It's not an HTML document, but it's a document after all. So dynamic content. The status of template is the polyfill is rather simple and easy. So if you are on a browser that is super old and doesn't support it, like Internet Explorer 11, super old, Nice. I know banks that use internally Internet Explorer 8, so there we go. But the polyfill is reasonable. All vendors are fine with it. No one is contesting it anymore. No one is complaining about it anymore. And it's coming soon to all evergreen browsers. So the latest Safari supports it. Edge 13 supports it. I'm not sure about 12. And yeah, it happened. Firefox does it. Chrome does it. Safari does it. Microsoft soon will do. And this is how it looks. So basically say, I have a template with a bunch of stuff in here. And that could include videos and images and whatnot. So basically, it can be anything. And the browser isn't actually going to execute and run this. It's not going to render it right away, but it's going to parse it. So it takes this string and makes a part of a tree from it. So basically, it builds the DOM for you, but it doesn't execute anything and doesn't create anything else in memory. It's just the tree structure. So that means images are not going to be loading, scripts are not executing, videos aren't loading and playing. They just sit there inertly in your DOM, well, offside the DOM. It's a DOM document fragment. If you haven't heard of that, definitely check out what document fragments are. And it just sits there as a placeholder and waits for you to actually make it happen and make it active. And that's how you do it. You grab the instance of the template element, you grab its content. I had to sort of do this because, you know, line size is limited. You get the content of this particular node, you import it, and possibly if there's like stuff like event handlers and things like this, you import it all into a clone node, which then just dangles around, and then you say, all right, I'm gonna sort of change the structure or the content of this clone that I have here. So in this case, we're setting hi, exclamation mark, to the H1 that is in our wonderful, oh, it's not here. Oh, yes, it is. There it is. There we go. Setting the text content of this headline in our cloned node, and then we append it somewhere into the document, and then it actually starts to execute and do things for us. Cool. So that didn't hurt too much. It's a little typey stuff, but you can easily extract that into a method or function or a library or whatever you like, and then use that. No more need for handlebars, no more need for other crazy things. And it's freaking fast. So I measured the performance once, and the problem with most of the template languages is that they basically use inner HTML, which means the browser has to then constantly parse the entire content into DOM nodes and then insert it in the live DOM, which is bad. Here, this one, because it creates a separate document fragment, you can do all the manipulations off main thread, basically, and then when you actually put it into your document, then it starts hitting your users and possibly performance if it's a really bad thing. But it's orders of magnitude faster. Which brings us to the next one, which is Shadow DOM. It solves the problem that if we are not careful enough, things get tangled and messy, and then we have this coupling issue. So when we touch one bit in the code, it breaks all of it, also known as CSS. CSS is super cool, but you really have to make sure you understand what you're doing and what it does, because it's called cascading for a reason. A cascade is great until it's a cascade of shit. So yeah, right, so there we go. And it solves that, but the problem is it is very hard to polyfill because you have to basically hook into all the methods that you have to change DOM content, which means like insert node, append child, insert before, query selector, all that has to be changed. Inner HTML, all that has to be hooked. At some point, I'm not sure if it's still true, but at some point I was reading through the source code of one of the polyfills, and I found a dramatic pause, 30 lines long regular expression. Ow. So yeah, it's hard to polyfill. Angular and Polymer, for instance, work around this fact by saying, you know what, if you want isolation, just use a limited set of the APIs that we expose to you. And Polymer is called Shady DOM. I'm not sure what Angular calls it, but they have a similar concept for components. But going fully on Shadow DOM right now is risky. Vendors had, until recently, and by recently I mean like August last year, they had been fighting over the details on how this should be implemented and specified, so the spec is still in flux. It's starting to settle down now, but there's still some open discussions, and there's some changes pending, like how it works right now is probably not going to be how it's going to look like in 6 months. So probably not ready for prime time just yet, but really interesting to look at. So let's look into it. So basically what we do is we have our DOM tree, and here in this DOM element in the tree, we create a shadow root, and this means that we have a subtree that is hidden from the rest. So everything that happens in this green box is hidden from these. So if I have a JavaScript here that asks for, or in the body I have a JavaScript that asks for how many h1 elements do I have, it's going to answer 1, because it can't see this one. So this gives us isolation. But it gives us isolation to prevent accidental things to happen. So it's not a security feature, which means I can cross this border. There is ways of doing that. They are discussing if they should remove it or if they should limit it. But by default, I would not assume security just yet. It's just more, you can't accidentally do stuff. You can't accidentally touch the internals of a component, which is nice. And this is how it's done. You have some container element. I create me a div here. I create a shadow root, and all the contents I want to show up in this shadow root, I basically append them into the root of this, but this makes it into the DOM, but inside the shadow root. Alternatively, I could have had something in a template, so I could have my div and my h1 in there, and then I could use this as the container and create the shadow root, which hides everything that is in the container that existed beforehand. And then we just append the container and work with the container and be happy and merry for every couple of years. So that was it. That was not too hard. There's also things like this, more advanced features that I don't have time to go in right now, but totally ask me for it later, like content insertion and stuff, really great. Custom elements, as I said, allow us to write new tags. And they solve this problem by saying, you know what, you shouldn't always sort of have to write a lot of stuff. You basically want to have a tag, an HTML tag that you then just append to it, and you want to go like document create blah, and then it creates your blah component, and then you can do stuff with it. So it hides all the gory details implementation-wise. So Shadow DOM hides all the implementation details as in all the content that our stuff creates, our component creates. This one hides all the implementation details for people using our component, which is nice. Mileage may vary, so polyfill is totally reasonable and possible, and there's in London, in a bar, the world is small, I met a guy who built his own custom elements polyfill for IE8. There we go, it's possible, it's doable. I couldn't probably even do like a clickable link or something in IE8 because IE8 is horrible. But yeah, whatever. So polyfillable, definitely yes, it's progressively enhanceable because you can use these extensions like image is something is always going to be an image, but if you enhance it with new stuff, that's nice. You can also do that when you're not using extensions because you can more or less do what video does, so you can nest things and then the browser will pick the thing that it understands. So that's possible. GitHub uses these. So GitHub, when you see like 14 hours ago, that is a web component, a custom element or a custom component that if you don't have a browser that supports them, just shows the date and time. That's it. So it falls back reasonably. Vendors mostly agree. There's a few bits and pieces of discussion, and there's some changes coming up. They're going to change the way registries work, but it's pretty much stable and nice and really great to use so far. And this is how it's done. You create yourself a prototype, for instance, by extending the prototype of the image element. And you have a created callback, which is called once this is sort of registered and ready. And this is an attached callback that is called when it's inserted into the DOM. You can do stuff there. There's a detached callback. There's attributes change whenever the attributes change. So you can react to certain events in the life cycle of your component. And you can create, you can do new xgif in this case. You can use declarative ways by typing HTML or imperative ways of instantiating this. And then you register your element with a tag name. It has to contain a dash. The dash is important so the browser knows, oh, this is not one of my thingies. This is someone else's, and instantiates the correct thing. And then we have a bunch of options. The most important is the prototype, where we say this has this element as its prototype. and we extend the image in this case. And then we can use it like this. So we have a random GIF, and we may have an attribute that allows us to play this GIF faster, and that's how we do it. And because it's actually extending the image, we can also do this. So for instance, if XGIF, for instance, basically makes it a video and we can play and pause it or something, then even IE6 is going to display the freaking animated GIF. But on modern browsers, you then have the additional elements that allow you to pause it and play it and do stuff with it. Nice. So that were custom components. You can smush them together. And this is the part of the API that might change, and that's the content insertion that I said. So basically here we have a template for a component that's a news box or something. And first of all, in this template, we want to render always the breaking news and then the rest of the normal news. And here what we can do is we can select content from outside. So in the HTML that the person at the newspaper's website writes, the HTML they write contains a bunch of things in here, and they might have the class breaking. So if they have a class of breaking, they're going to be inserted here. This is going to select any element that has a class of breaking right here. And only then the rest, because there's no selector here, all the rest is going to come in as the normal news, below the normal news headline. And this is how it would look. So for instance, you might have a news which is like April weather strikes in Bern, and then there's a breaking news, nobody gives a damn. And the effect is, because we specified so, this is going in first because it has the class breaking news. And this one then obviously goes second, which kind of ruins the joke, but you know. HTML imports, last but not least. We have this problem of trying to get everything to work together and sort of be easy to pull together and then do the dance for us. So if we want to get all these benders together to dance for us, we probably need a lot of beer and cigars. In HTML, we need HTML imports. The problem is that there's a lot of disagreement on how this really should be implemented internally. So Firefox or Mozilla said we're going to halt this because we're going to figure out ES6 modules first, because maybe we're going to use them. And it's pretty hard to polyfill because you have to reach relatively far into the browser, more or less like with Shadow DOM. And the biggest problem with the implementation that exists right now, even in Chrome, is it's synchronous, which means it's going to see the link, it's going to load it, it's going to download this other HTML file, unless it's in the cache, obviously. It's going to parse it, and it's going to insert it, and that blocks the rest of the rendering, which is bad. There's workarounds there. There's well-documented workarounds on the internet for it, but it's a workaround. And I don't think a standard is good when, before it even is finished, there is a workaround to fix a problem with it. So, not so cool yet. But this is how you do it. Now go back to your application code. So you basically just specify a link with a relation import and then where it gets the HTML from, and that can then download other components and all that, so you don't have to worry about this one. All right. Why? All right, I sort of formatted it nicely, but now it goes, all right, whatever. So there's a bunch of other frameworks out there, and how do they play along with web components? So Angular 2 has their own Shadow DOM polyfill kind of thingy, and it can use Shadow DOM if it's natively available for components, and it can use custom elements for components if that is available, which is nice. Ember, as far as I can tell, recently started following their component specification more or less mimics what the web standards do. So they try to follow the specification changes, as far as I can tell. Follow web, yeah, wonderful. Google crashed at some point saving this, and I guess this is what I got from it. Yeah, React, it's complicated, but it's possible to use React in web components or use web components in React. They don't really solve the same problem, because React tries to give you a declarative API over data and state, whereas web components try to isolate parts of the functionality in your markup. So it's definitely possible to sort of use web components in React and the other way around. Aurelia.js, which is pretty hot right now as well, is definitely compatible and interoperable. So all the data binding stuff works, as far as I'm aware. Vue.js, which is a really nice and small framework. It's more a library than a framework, really. actually uses template elements as is, and it works really well. It's compatible and interoperable as well. And then Polymer, it's a trick question. It's a web components framework, so yeah, it uses web components full stop. So with that, what makes a good web component? Very quickly, a web component should always have a clearly stated purpose. Displaying a GIF is a clearly stated purpose. It should be self-contained. If I need to install Polymer or if I need to install something else, it's not self-contained, and that's not cool. It should be accessible. Do not break accessibility guidelines. Do not break the area APIs and labels and stuff. It should be performance, so please, please, please do performance tests in all browsers that you think are sort of make sense to test in. And they should be extensible. If you hide everything away from me and I can never actually build on top of your work, that's bad. So if you sort of follow that, then your components will be great. Regarding browser support, looking pretty good for templates. Done, done. 13. Okay, I wasn't lying. HTML imports, Safari goes, nah. Edge goes, maybe. Custom elements actually now are being worked on Edge. I saw that like a couple of days ago. Forgot to update the screenshot. And then we have that stuff, Shadow DOM, actually in the WebKit nightly, so it's going to come soonish, I guess. So my basic summary is start using templates, start experimenting with the other thingies. Custom elements more likely to be ready for usage when you do it right than the other two. Bunch of frameworks, definitely recommend checking out Polymer. If you need a good book, just wait a few months in the German market. It's a German book, unfortunately, sorry. I was forced to by the pub. No, just kidding. I just went like, yeah, why not? Just, screw like 90% of the people. There's polyfills from Polymer, which are web components JS and are agnostic of the framework. Good one. Xtags by Mozilla is more a library than actual web components. And then there's a few more polyfills linked here that are useful. Speaking of linked, the slides are online already. Write me an email, ping me on Twitter, and I'm happy to take questions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Are there any questions?
It's like, what the fuck's happening? Questions, I've never seen those on conferences.
On the content insertion slide, you showed the with the breaking headline or news. How would I hide the first header if there is no breaking news? Would I have to implement this in JavaScript, I guess?
Yeah. Unfortunately, yes. Let me think about this. Theoretically, you can get really, really tricky and more or less make. So what you could do is totally possible. You could isolate this into a template and only insert it if you see with JavaScript, because your document, your component has to be, where is it? Has to be registered in JavaScript anyways. So what you could do is you could basically have a piece of CSS that hides everything that is in the component when the component doesn't work. And then you basically have this as a separate template, and you only display that template when there's things to insert into this one available. Possible.
Okay.
Welcome.
Any other questions?
All right.
Okay, then.
Everyone was checking emails. Right.
Then thank you for your talk.